Preschool, there was this kid named Davy. Reason I hate the name Davy is he was a bully, and I stood up to him. I ended up knocking him over after he was being really crass and rude to some of the girls in the class. Man, if you want to live by your values and your actions and do what you say, since I was a kid, I've had this moral.
I think that's why you are the leader that you are, is because you never wanted it. It wasn't driven for the sake of ego, power, or control. You had to surrender to the natural flow and gifts that you were given to lead people.
I was meant to be a leader, to lead as a servant leader with others before we used that term. And I spent a lot of my early career not doing that and empowering other people who took all the credit as opposed to built community with what they did, until I finally said,
welcome back to Flipping the Lid. You know what we do here by now. And if you don't, then you're going to get a real first-time experience where we jump in, we have a real raw conversation with a superhuman who is also a super connector. One of the things I love to do is to normalize the conversations, the paths and journeys that get us here rather than just the highlight reels and the human experience that we all go through. This man has a very deep understanding of that. As someone who has had to find ways to express himself, to connect with others in multiple ways, from magic to ultimately working in philanthropy. And he is now, I believe, one of the greatest connectors that I know. He is focused as a connector of connectors, and everything that he does is about connecting with himself and connecting with others for the benefit of humanity. It's amazing to see what he does to support family offices, what he's doing to build technology, the work that he's doing around things like Alzheimer's. And this guy seems to touch so many different ripples in life and ultimately so many people. So, David, my brother, I am so happy to be jumping in with you today.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
One of the only questions I ask every single guest is, who are you in your words?
I was telling my 10-year-old who I am the other day because she was having a hard time trying to understand that I'm 45 and I still feel like a kid inside, trying to figure out if I can grow up or when I'm going to grow up. And then I remember my dad is 86. He's still a kid inside, and that was my model. So who I am inside, I'm this little kid that tried to connect with people, wanted to be invited to the party, was never sure people would show up at my party. I am still never sure of that, to be fair and honest. But at the same time, I found my purpose and my calling, my spirituality, and it's in other people and that belief that we could be better and greater together.
Yeah, man. I so deeply appreciate the way that you even answered that question. You know, I'm a father of a 9 and a 10-year-old myself. And, you know, it is interesting because the more I have been able to sit as a father and reflect on the journey of getting them even to where they are right now, it's been such a healthy reminder of how, in so many cases, myself included, people have been forced to grow up too fast. And I find a way, or I find often that it's like we lose that sense of curiosity, that sense of wonder, that sense of play and exploration. And yet you're able to identify that as something that you can hold on to. It's something I've been curating in my own house, but I think it's also interesting. My 10-year-old boy also reflected back to me very easily that my humor never advanced beyond being a 10-year-old boy. And so, bro, I feel like I'm right there with you, but it's something that I really appreciate, even how you brought in your father and your kids and the multi-generational elements of what take place. You know, I know that you honor your dad in lots of ways for the childhood that you feel like you had, the guidance and the mentorship and the home that you had in many respects. And now you are a father that's extending that down to the next generation. Give us a little bit of a story of early David, right? Because you are a 45-year-old version of that little kid. Where were you when you were the little kid? And what did that look like for you, both socially and from a creative standpoint back then?
Sure. All right. Preschool, there was this kid named Davy. He wasn't me. He went by Davy. Reason I hate the name Davy is he was a bully. And I stood up to him. I ended up knocking him over after he was being really crass and rude to some of the girls in the class. I stood up. I got punished. They called me into the other room. My mom came to deal with the punishment, which was a thank you to my mom and I for me dealing with the bully the kindergarten teachers could not, or the pre-K could not. And then I went home and got an ice cream, or actually it was This Can't Be yogurt for the day, to date back to the 80s when that was a big thing. And since that moment, I've always stood up for right and wrong. My triggers, you want to see me not as a calm, cool, collected human. Injustice, hypocrisy, man, If you want to live by your values and your actions and do what you say, since I was a kid, I've had this moral code. And I've been relentless to make sure that somebody is not being treated wrongly by somebody else. Flash forward, I got this Hugh O'Brien Leadership Award when I was in high school, and I went to Tallahassee, Florida with a bunch of other kids that had all been chosen as leaders. And there was this beautiful pianist playing, this woman, teenager. I didn't know what women were then. I probably still don't now. And this guy came up. He's one of those, like, he was a pianist, but he was a bro. And he tried to show her up and prove that he was better than her at piano. And it's like, if you're at a party and you're playing piano, like, express yourself, just let the person play. So I went up and I started playing Hot Cross Buns. Then I started playing Fur Elise. And then I started playing an incredible version of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, involving the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Nirvana, Guns N' Roses, The Doors. I mixed in all this other music that this guy couldn't even hear because he wasn't creative. He could just play. And everyone knew I was making fun of him but him. And so I've always stood up for that, for the people that don't have the opportunities that I've had. And in that, I have faced adversity that in my world was quite significant, but compared to many people I know is completely insignificant. But I learned that we only live in that perspective of ourselves. So I was, an all-star pitcher. I was accurate. I was fast. Threw a pitch one game right before the beginning of 6th grade. I blacked out. 8 months later, I'd been to the hospital, 50 times. I'd had my blood drawn 3 times a week. We'd never diagnosed what I had. I barely went to 6th grade. I lost any skill of socialization. I couldn't run a mile in less than 15 minutes, and I had to rebuild myself, and I never felt like I belonged again. And that affected my entire psyche of what was that injustice, that hypocrisy of me who had fit in, now never feeling like I did, always being friends with older kids, never feeling like I was an athlete or a creative, an actor, a musician. And then I got a huge job when I was 26, and suddenly I was a CEO, an executive, and then I didn't fit in with the friends who didn't have that job. And then I realized I really like to find one type of person. And I'm staring at him right now as one of my friends, my connectors, my world, of the people who look at that with a different perspective. We talk about never losing that childlike quality. Mm-hmm. What I don't want my kids to lose, what I love that my father still has, is curiosity. I love that my world is about vulnerability. I love that it's about generosity. And I love that I can weave all those together in a diverse culture that I've built for myself that has honor at its core with how you treat relationships. And that's become my whole world, not to make me feel like I fit in, because I still don't, but to make me feel like I've made sure everyone else who doesn't feel that way fits in the network and the community that I've built.
Brother, I genuinely love you. I know that we have yet to meet in person, and I know that when we do, it's going to be a magical hug, because I just feel the energy and the vibe. Your heart is so palpable. You know, when you started talking about this, it was interesting. As you were beginning the story and what you did to defend, every cell in my gut was activating, because I've recently, in the last few weeks, been asked multiple times, what is your greatest trigger? Like, what's the fastest way to like set you off, to have you go like full like armor mode? And it's anytime there's injustice in this world.
Yeah.
Whether it's to myself or to other people. And so, though you and I've never shared that word in that way, around it being one of our mutual passions for protecting and advocating for others, it's not a surprise that in the first 10 minutes of our conversation today, that surfaced. Because I feel like that's what I see in you, is somebody who really is an advocate for humanity, right? An advocate to be able to make sure that those that have been overlooked, misinterpreted, isolated, had to defend based on external perceptions, a space to feel safe, to feel protected, to feel seen. so that we can do what we're wired to do at the deepest level, which is to connect with ourselves and each other. And you live that way. And so I really want to just honor you for even all of how you just articulated that. What I also have to acknowledge is that like you and like many of the people I think you and I attract and help, though you didn't say these words, I'll tell you that this was my experience. I got really used to being the only one in almost every room I walked into.
Absolutely.
Right. And so though I am also a white male, that I can recognize and acknowledge the privileges that give me, I don't know what it's like to be a person of color. I don't know what it's like to be someone who's transgender. I don't know what it's like to be somebody on the other side of the world. However, I do know what it's like to be the only one in the room. And many people in these alternative categories of humanity have also understood what that feels like. And so what I want to know is, when was the first time that you were aware that you felt like the only one in the room?
I'm thinking back to many times, trying to go back to the first one. Let me give you the first one where I realized that I was aware of the insignificance I felt in a room.
Okay.
I fundraised for a living for many years. I ran a global charity. I walked into a room, a very elite room in New York. No one knew who I was. They were waiting for the person to host. And because I was younger, because the cut of my suit was a Men's Warehouse suit, because that's what I could afford, because my shoes were what I had, and if that was a choice, I could have looked a different part. I didn't want to be a different part. And I was made to feel inferior as a person because my net worth was not high. And about 20 minutes later, somebody came up who knew me a little bit and said, "Are you ready to greet everyone?" Because I was the host. And I walked up on a stage, channeling my Shakespearean scholar, actor father. And I no longer looked poor. I no longer looked like I didn't have the poise. But you want to talk about those triggers? I didn't care at all about any of those people in the room for anything now but their net worth, because all they were to me were possible checks to support a charity. They were not people I thought of that shared a humanity, because their value was in their net worth, not their network.
Yep.
And then this beautiful friend of mine comes up, still a friend to this day. She says to me, "Well, you showed them, didn't you?" And she knew. And she was, an Upper East Side, multi-generation family, but she didn't care about it. She had an authenticity. She's been my friend to this day because she was the only one that didn't make me feel like the other. And if you were to figure out who she was, she wouldn't have been that archetype. She was older. She was elite. She had multiple homes. And you would never have guessed when you saw her sitting at a Cafe Metro having a tuna salad sandwich and drinking a generic cheap coffee, because her value wasn't the way we prescribe value. Her value was in connection.
I lived a lot of my life very disconnected, attempting to protect myself from the insecurities in all the areas that I never felt like I fit in. Right. And it's a topic that we teach today, that the second we protect ourselves, we actually also disconnect ourselves from who we are and what we want. Right. And also the two things we want most, which is to be seen, understood, and connected at the deepest level. And what I started to realize is the level of ownership I had to step into, that it was my armor that was diluting my intent in most situations, because my energy and actions would communicate something that weren't congruent, which would only lead to this cyclical pattern of me feeling further disconnected. As somebody who so young was able to identify feeling like the only one in every room, for you to be able to channel your father in that moment, I don't believe was a fabrication of who you were either. It was true channeling and allowing your authenticity to be seen.
It's true.
To learn. Go ahead.
I just want to interject to say, because we talked about this in my context and you with our kids talking about still feeling like we're that kid inside. Mm-hmm. Like everyone can spin the way they were in the past as if they knew the way they were, but only in the perspective of looking at it now could I even describe that with any strength.
Yeah.
My hands always sweat.
Yeah.
Don't even want to tell you what happens to my feet. And I'm in this world where like now these people in this world, the insane network that I've built respects me. And I could go back and describe how everything I did was intentional, but the point was it wasn't intentional.
Yeah.
And it wasn't purposeful. And only when I named what those weaknesses were and turned them into strengths, only when I said in my world, you can be honorable or dishonorable and there's no in between. And only when I defined it and unapologetically had people continue to criticize me for setting up a value system that they couldn't think to exist around connection. Mm-hmm. Almost 9 years into that, people are starting to listen.
Right.
And I've not said anything different about honoring connections, relationship, value, and trust. I might have gotten better at it than my 36-year-old self or my 25-year-old self. And yeah, that core value, the values from my parents, it became it. But I had to own however I lived in this. And I had to be okay, not just with the criticism of it from myself and others. I had to find a way to channel that so other people could see it in themselves in order for them to not experience that hypocrisy or injustice that I've fortunately been able to overcome. But many people who build value with people, not with titles or jobs or money, still don't see the value in.
Yeah. I appreciate you jumping in and giving some further depth in that. What's really beautiful about it is it was actually leading towards a question I was going to ask you, and you just anticipated, right? Because part of that was, though you were able to channel in moments, there was a lot that you were also unconscious to. And it wasn't until you stepped into it from a position of ownership and vulnerability that you started to allow yourself to connect at the deeper levels, right? Because you could perform in a moment on stage and have it be authentic to move a room, but to bring people to a place of being gravitated towards you, it's the stepping into the humanity that you teach and advocate for by also removing your layers of protection in the unknown pieces. And that's what I would love to understand is you did have this great moment where you felt insignificant in a room and then showed them as you said it, right? As your friend said it. But what I also know is that the 25-year-old self and the 36-year-old self that you referenced were more armored versions of who you are, less open, less authentic than you are today. And I think there's an abundance that comes from it. So though you were unconscious and you can speak about it in hindsight with intention, you also are very highly intentional. And so from 25 to 36 or 36 to today, what have been the intentional elements of bringing yourself into more vulnerability and allowing yourself to be more and more and more authentic that have correlated to deeper connections with yourself and others?
You asked that so eloquently, and it makes me not want to answer eloquently back.
Then don't.
I was dumb as bricks about the network I built. Yeah, I was happy I knew people who were famous or giving fudge families or things like that. And I had purpose and intention in it. But I was literally an idiot because at my birthday parties, at events, and everything I went to, I would constantly be surprised for years that the people I loved and trusted didn't know I felt that about both of them. That was one of my biggest mistakes. And I, of course, corrected it. But I spent a significant amount of my life building trust with people and not understanding that conveying that trust, me to you, you to somebody else, was as important for you as it was for me or them. And I sat there blind, walking through, thinking about being connected and all the things that were happening to me and wanting to help all these other people. And I missed thousands of opportunities because I couldn't see past myself. And I had moments going to China when I was 7, a few years before Tiananmen Square, when my dad taught there, when my younger brother and I, in the height of one child policy, were 2 boys in the People's Republic. I had that years before when I traveled to Cuba and I met musicians who made their living as musicians, not doctors or lawyers. I had that with getting a huge job at an early age and succeeding well through Bernie Madoff and the housing bubble recession. And none of that prepared me for the work I had to do. Because no matter what I had of that armor, when I watched the Twin Towers fall, I had a panic attack a few months later, thought I was having a heart attack, got an EKG. No one could diagnose this because mental health diagnosis sucks in this country, and it's better now. And my life nearly fell completely apart, and I was powerless. And then I built myself back up. I got my huge job. I was in Israel. I experienced being adjacent to a war starting, not the war, to be clear, in 2006. And I was powerless again when anxiety hit me. And as I was realized that no one talked about this, no one talked about it. Yeah, I'm a CEO on multiple businesses. I have had panic attacks. They could happen again. Do you want to hire me? Isn't a conversation people felt brave enough to say.
Yep.
And then I realized, just think about the person who's gone through that and gotten stronger and what their armor is then, from being able to embrace that and realize that anyone who says they're perfect is far from it. Anyone who says, not meaning to chide in for politics, that they're the greatest, there's no such thing. Everything you do to mask yourself in greatness, in power and pompousness is to disguise and hide the fact that inside you're still trying to justify yourself. And at some point, I realized I was past caring about justifying myself, and that comfort became my true armor. Because I used to say, you can't take away anything from me because I write music.
Yeah.
A handful of people. I can actually just tell you the hundreds or thousands, depending on my streaming feeds a year, actually like it. But you can't take that from me.
Yeah.
And the respect that I have built with people for how I am described when I am not around the people mentioning me, that relationship value I have earned by action upon action upon action, and encourage people to only judge people, not based on their eloquence, because we could wax esoteric. And I will still say to everyone, I wasn't dumb as bricks and it affected me. I was dumb as bricks and it affected other people. And I didn't realize it. And now it is in my power to awaken this idea of relationships, of connecting, of purposeful community, a book, a startup, this podcast, and all these things, with that intention being to name the things other people need to name so they can find their strength.
Yeah. One of the core concepts we teach, again, is this idea that when we protect ourselves, we disconnect ourselves. But the whole point is getting ourselves to a place where we no longer need to protect, defend, justify anything about who we are. I equate it to that end scene at the end of 8 Mile when Eminem just goes on and on about all the things that are there. And then he basically drops the mic. He's like, what do you got on me? Right? Real freedom does exist on the other side of just complete transparency and vulnerability. And yet that is exactly what you just said, right? That was your exact lived experience, is that the armor actually created disconnection and damage in your world. And that it was you who had to be the thermostat, not the thermometer, to reset how you were connecting in this world. One of the things that you and I also share, because I've got a deep history in philanthropy, though I didn't work in it professionally, I've, for my entire career as an adult, been around very high net worth individuals as well. And I think you're talking about anytime that we're justifying, putting things in language around how we're the greatest, all of these things are really to protect these insecurities. And what I found is that my insecurity through armor with high net worth individuals in particular just created even further disconnection. But yet I also can come in and be open, honest, operate in the way that you're describing. And it actually invites people at that level who typically are in a position where people only want something from, to realize that we want for them, and there can be a deeper connection. You smile, and I think you know exactly where I'm going with this, but you are a master at doing this, and it's not for the sake of manipulation or what you want from them. It's genuinely about helping elevate humanity, regardless of where they're at from a net worth standpoint, right? But especially at the high net worth, I find that there's a level of disconnection that takes place there because they're constantly having to protect in different ways. And yet sometimes there's people like you and I who can see them and connect with them in a deeper way. How did you learn to do that, regardless of what was in the bank account for someone, and allow somebody to really feel that emotional safety and ability to be seen by you, another human?
So my Willie Loman moments were fundraising for an amazing arts charity that essentially the sell was, would you like to fund a 12-year-old tuba lessons in Israel? Would you like to help a ceramist at 17 become incredible? Would you like, and name the art form? And then I'd ask people to be patient for 10, 15, 20 years sometimes. We had the examples of the greatest of the greats of the musicians like Itzhak Perlman, choreographer Ohad Naharin, and many others. But even with that, I had to convince people. I ran a nonprofit. It's all about fundraising. You have to execute well. You have to run events well. You have to send acknowledgement letters well, but you have to build relationships and have people invest in you to trust you for that mission. And the mission I was selling was beautiful and incredibly hard.
Yeah.
And every time I heard no, which you hear endlessly in philanthropy, I didn't come back with some feeling of being wronged or hurt. I came back and I said, well, tell me what you're most passionate about. And they would start to tell me. And I'll tell you, if you ask enough questions in life instead of just answering your own to other people, at some point you start to see the patterns, especially if you're a connector. Then when you start to see the patterns, but you've built respect by actually making somebody who, yes, they might be very wealthy, but it doesn't mean they don't want to be heard, don't want to be appreciated. And if you look at who they are in that composite for which they have the wealth and you make the focus who they are and they have the wealth, then they start to see you as a peer, because if you become comfortable in your own skin, you are a peer. There's no such thing as 1,000 great connections. There's just one connection at a time. There's no such thing as having hundreds of relationships. You might have a relationship by hundreds, which I do and you do. But you have to focus on each person. And you have to figure out if you can find something in yourself and them and have them see it in you.
Yeah.
And so I would get judged, right? You talk about those elite rooms. I would go into rooms where I was 20, 30, sometimes 60 years younger than the people. And I would look at them and I would say, you know, I'm sure that you too were judged equally by your capabilities, but your youth when you were my age. And I would watch each person melt and go, I remember when I was young. I remember when I was eager. I remember when I was capable and everyone told me I had to wait or I didn't deserve what I was asking for. And when I put them in my shoes and then I put myself in theirs, thinking, how many times do you get asked for money? How many times do you get asked for help? And how many times does somebody deliver on activating your passions for you, even if there's nothing in return? Talking about building trust through action. Think about everything we want to have in this life and everything we think that we desire. And then trickle it down to the things we actually need. And they are so few and far between what is actually needed. And just try doing that with our 10-year-olds or our younger ones and try to convince them that what they want isn't what they actually want, because we're really trying to convince them that what they need are the things that money doesn't buy.
Yeah. Which took me, unfortunately, almost 30 years to learn myself. Right. And that's something that I definitely appreciate. I just so deeply appreciate the way you answer questions, the way your brain works, the words that come out in combination. You and I know that we've got deep synergy, but I would tell you that, you know, even what you just said, and I want to reinforce this for the sake of everyone listening, I've said for years that I'm only as good as my questions, which means if I'm not getting the answers that I want or desire or I believe are capable, then I need to ask better questions. And what you're really talking about is, again, curiosity and wonder as it relates to how do I create impact for someone else? You know, one of the biggest things that was cool in one of our nonprofit philanthropy fundraisers with a capital campaign that I helped run as a volunteer was it was one of the first 7-figure gifts that had been given to an organization. And it was a guy who's been involved for 10 or 15 years. And his response when asked, well, how come you've never given to this level before? He said, well, you've never given me $1 million idea before.
Yeah.
Like he didn't have something he could connect to. It was like just asking for the sake of these things versus creating an ask that was aligned with his intentions, which is very much what we are looking for as it relates to anything we do with relationships. Is again, are we actually caring for and are we asking in ways to create alignment for the people that we are trying to either impact or get their assistance and help from? And you have done this very, very well. You know, I'm going to shift the topic pretty dramatically here for a second because I love the theme that we're on, but it just popped into my head and I have to trust this question for a second. I've heard you reference your father a lot. I don't think I've ever heard you talk about your mother. Do you mind giving us some insight into the relationship with your mom?
Not at all. So what's interesting is I am much more like my mother than my father. But if you ever met them and sat down at a dinner table, my father would talk for 2 hours. My mom would say 2 sentences. And everything my father says is brilliant and beautiful. And the 2 things my mom says are the 2 things you needed to hear.
Yeah,
and my mom is 4'11" and my dad is like 6 feet tall. So they're drastically different in terms of how they look. And they've had a beautiful, wonderful marriage for years. And I'm my mother as much as I'm my father. My ability to multitask, my organization, my mindfulness, the perspective. I didn't learn that. So my dad's name is Sid Homan. So we call him Showman. I didn't learn that from Showman. I learned how to warm up the room, to direct, to act, to embody that person from my father. But I learned how to get there from my mother. And that was the difference. I learned how to take something that was incredibly complex and just tackle it seamlessly, easily, because I had the confidence and the wonder to try. And I never stressed about it. I knew I could do anything because of the mindset my mother gave me. And so I had this weird world where I was left brain and right brain. And then I was extraordinarily organized and diligent. And then I could walk on a stage. And I never wanted to be the leader. That was the other part of my formation. Like I never wanted to be it because that was my dad. I wanted to be my mom. And I turned down a national leadership position with a charity. I wanted to run their health conference. I turned down things till I was thrust in the spotlight. Talk about one of those other aha dumb moments. I was meant to be a leader, to lead as a servant leader with others before we used that term. And I spent a lot of my early career not doing that and empowering other people who took all the credit as opposed to built community with what they did until I finally said, I am not the connector of connectors or the most connected person. I have the trust of the most connected people. And all I've done is name what our power is in a way that so far doesn't exist elsewhere in this world in terms of connecting and relationship value. Because I had to be the leader to say it. I'm not the best connected. I'm not the best at any of this. I'm not the greatest, so to speak, because you can't be great in a community that's supposed to be amongst peers and equals. And that humility is what I learned from my mom with those 2 sentences she would say at the end, because she spent those 2 hours listening.
I think that's why you are the leader that you are, is because you never wanted it. It wasn't driven for the sake of ego, power, or control. You had to surrender to the natural flow and gifts that you were given to lead people. And you didn't want to be the face. I think there's so much power in when you can recognize that that is a fundamental shift that you weren't ever seeking, but you did have to surrender to at some point. Because, by the way, my friend, in the way that you move, whether you have the most connections, whether you're the greatest or not, you move in such a unique way that you make connections accessible for people. And many don't have that ability.
Can I tell you what makes it easy?
Go ahead.
No one's ever met a living classical composer because no one listens to classical music. So that whole brand, everything I've built is based on the fact no one actually really cares about what drives my core, which is my music. I have thousands of friends and tens of thousands of contacts, and they don't listen to my music, even if they love who I am. I live with that. Doesn't mean I'm happy about it, but I'm okay with it because the thing that I want to do that's greater is for everyone else, and that's to find the resonance with people meeting each other my music couldn't create.
So I'm really grateful you went there, and even in how you said that. Just to be clear, I have asked Alexa to play your music more than once. I find you to be an extremely intriguing and interesting person to witness how your creativity comes into the world, right? Classic composure, or being a classic composer, is the core, as you describe it, of who you are, right? It's like one of your biggest interests, one of your biggest passions, one of the things that you want to be recognized for as well. The thing that I also want to reflect, though, is that I think it is 100% because you're a classical composer, and the way that you understand frequency and vibration, and the way you understand how notes connect to each other, and the nuances and dynamics and the contrast that can exist in music are also the reality of the rhythms of life. What's really beautiful is your artistic ability and your creativity and your wonder are a gift in your ability to connect. And so I want to sit here for just a second because I want to honor what you've expressed to be the greatest expression of yourself, which is your music. You've got 7 albums that are currently available that people can say, Alexa, please play the music of David Homan. And I have an Alexa in here, so I'm hoping that she doesn't just start playing.
I'm not saying it because mine is right over my
I totally
shoulder.
forgot that I have that. Like, even so, my whole family has Alexas and I have not, but they've been starting to do these announcements. And so finally, I was like, babe, just put one in my office. But most of the time it's on mute, and every once in a while it hears me or does something like that, and then it starts going off. So I want you to spend just a minute, because music is huge, and you started playing piano because of Nirvana and The Simpsons.
So I want to clarify. I was playing for years. I quit.
And then you started playing
Nirvana
again?
and The Simpsons got me back at 12, not coincidentally, right when I got sick.
Okay.
And grunge rock and Mason Williams from The Simpsons, when they were protesting the nuclear power plant, got me into improv, which got me into composition. And my ability to weave words, my ability to just sit and play a piano, it's all the same. It's having a synthesis and a harmony in my head that I am now just comfortable throwing out there, to be damned what people think of what I say or what I play.
There's so much freedom in that, right? And yet, though you experience all this freedom, you still often feel like you don't fit. Describe that in your current state.
I'm at a really interesting part of my life. Like, my real friends ask me how I am, and I go, everything is going incredibly great. It's financially stressful, but it's going great. So therefore, I'm going to see which thing's going to fall apart. But that state of mind is successfully raising and building a startup around connection that everyone I know, invested or around me, believes I'm the one to build. In a crowded space where there's no such thing as a great personal CRM and ecosystem connection that exists. I got a book deal to write a book on this, on relationship value and what I call purposeful community, and name the principles and what I've called my methodology for years. And I got my first conference coming up in a handful of days, where people are coming in from around the world to see how I'm going to do a conference, because they hate most of the other things they go to, like they dislike or hate most of the events I go to and they go to. And so I'm doing everything different, yet everything the way that I intentionally think it should be. I don't have the financial means to take all these risks, but I'm doing it anyway because it is incumbent upon me to scale this for my legacy, for my impact, for my children, and for the fact that I can't see any other path forward, but taking what's in front of me that I've spent years to do and making it real instead of just talking about seeing the value in doing it.
It's going to be a little disjointed here in my next question because I want to jump back because we kind of brushed over the music piece. And I'm not sure that was coincidence. Do I have permission to reflect something back to you?
You do. Just know I just finished up a new ballet commission. So I locked and loaded a new piece that will be performed with the ballet company next year in this world.
Beautiful.
And because I did that, I was able to return from that creative side to this purposeful multi-business owner launching stuff side because I had that first.
Yeah.
And when I finish these, you mentioned earlier in the intro, Alzheimer's. When I finish these, I go hardcore into my film about a composer who loses his mind to Alzheimer's, yet we never know what it is until the movie's over.
Yes.
And so I have to juggle that balance because in the core, I'm going to be the dad that shows up. And in between those, I'm going to do something successful because I believe in other people being able to be greater than me because I can help them achieve their own inner greatness. And I'm going to continue to create at some point till everyone looks back and they go, hey, you just kept going. That's amazing. You never let yourself stop with it.
Yeah.
And that's because I never let anyone ever take away the fact that when I sit at a piano, when I improvise in particular, when I write a piece of music, if you were to give it the time of day, meaning you say to that device that's over my shoulder that I won't talk about because I didn't know when we started this, don't listen to the dishes. Take 5 minutes and focus on something and see what type of emotional journey you go through from it. The same way I've learned to be specific in my vernacular and my words around connecting because I've found the words that strung together a certain way speak a truth that isn't my truth. It's yours. It's anyone listening who doesn't see me as some dude with a successful IPO'd startup and a massive book and a TED Talk and all these things. They don't know me because they don't know that the person they trust the most values me and just hasn't even thought to make the introduction because they didn't ask purposefully enough to get on my radar for me to help them.
Yeah.
And so I go back to that, right? What's the core of the music? I'm not avoiding the question, but the core is if you could synthesize your emotional state in a way that was better than therapy, better than going on a run, better than playing with your kids, better than playing with the dog, then you could return to it every single day. What if that's a gift my music could give you? That every time you return to listening to it, you gain a stronger sense of purpose and self. And if I can do that right, what if I could achieve the one thing people think is absolutely insane to want, which is I want people to listen to my music, and then I want them to be silent and appreciate that the whole point of what you listen to is to redefine where you are when you're not listening. And by choosing to embrace it, by choosing not to interrupt it, to destroy it, to stop it, you are choosing to give yourself something that doesn't take away your time. It reinforces your sense of time. And if that can be an intention, even for people listening to my music, it doesn't matter what we say on this podcast. It doesn't matter when they eventually read my book or use my startup or anything. Because if I can help you get to a better sense of your purpose, and not as some guru going around the world selling multi-billion-dollar quick fixes, if I can teach you how to appreciate that dialogue in yourself, then you will not feel like an other the next time somebody treats you that way because they, in turn, truly feel the same.
It's beautiful, my friend. And thank you for fully coming back and answering the question. What I was going to reflect back to you is something that you anticipated and you are already actively working on, which is the active integration of your music in other areas of your life through projects that also give it other ways of exposure and make it accessible to others. what you described in terms of how people will experience and listen through your music, this moment, this what if somebody can actually experience that. I believe that it was also answering the question where I was really going to be asking you as well, which is, what do you experience internally when you sit down at the piano and create music?
When I sit down and I play, I pour everything out, and I'm only focused on activating what I'm hearing in my soul. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes it sucks really bad. And it gives me a really great referendum on whether I can clear that mechanism, whether I can focus or not.
Yeah.
And it's a check-in. It's a moment to shine. And it's something where I never know where I'm going to go, but I know where I'm going to come back.
I love that. One thing I have to also say to you as a friend before I ask a couple more questions is on the nature of the question that you had talked about, really where you're at in terms of a financial perspective and the strain that you may feel in building this so beautifully. The part I also want to remind you of, my friend, is that you're building it with 1,700 of the global superconnectors that are some of the wealthiest family offices, venture capitalists, impact investors, entertainers, athletes, all of the above that exist. And so why I say that is I know that you have had, or at least I believe you've had investors in certain moments up until now. But I have a sense that there is no lack of abundant resources available to you if you yourself believe and continue to step into what you're worth and put in place the right pathways for these people to give in alignment with ways of supporting you and the broader mission. I would just challenge you to continue to look at that through that lens, because what you've built is real, it's connected, and people want you to win. And so your care for advocating for injustice and making sure others get opportunity, you are surrounded by people who want the same for you because of how you live. And so I don't want you to lose sight of all of the resources that I believe you probably have access to that you may or may not lean into and think intentionally to ask for help. So take that for what it is.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. I want to shift again. You're a father of, I think, 2 kids, right?
2, 10-year-old girl, 7-year-old boy.
Okay. You and I are in the same stage of life, right? I have a 9 and a 10-year-old, a boy and a girl as well. I would love to understand, what is it that you've learned about yourself by being a father to Ava and Max?
Here we go. 1, I tell this to every new parent, and I've developed friendships with people by telling them this. Minute you have your first kid, everything before becomes before. And if you don't have children, I can't explain that to you.
You can't
If you
explain
have kids,
that. Yeah.
You get it. That's part of it. 2, and I learned this the hard way, to be clear, now that I have older children who make fun of how I act. You want to know how I'm a really safe driver, but I'm not a quiet driver? You want to know how I act? Just find a moment with my kids and say, what's daddy's like in the car? And my 7-year-old will be like, that's not right. Now, it's probably an injustice in driving that's pissing me off, to be clear. But like, your kids pay attention to you every moment, not the moments you think you're parenting. And understanding that, and understanding that you're everybody's parents in whatever incarnation of it, or if you didn't have parents, you were raised by an aunt or a grandmother, whoever was formative for you, you were studying. And if you think you can turn on the charm when things are going well, you got to pay attention to what happens when you react and you don't think they're paying attention yet before they tell you what they heard you hear. And then you try to translate that into the fact everyone else is paying attention too. And it is impossible to balance all these things in one. You know, I write in my book about my principles and having this idea of culture and diversity and vulnerability and gratitude and honor and all this. And I can't even remember them all in the same sentence to tell you in a book that I'm writing, I'm going to promote it about, because they're too hard to keep in your head at once. And try to deal with that while being a parent and all the logistics. I've learned that, like both my parents, but especially my dad, I wake up positive every single day. And that is a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And I have learned that whatever happens in my life, I can take 10 deep breaths, which is what I teach my kids every day. And nothing seems as bad as when I've taken that little step.
Yep.
And I have learned that there is no reason to not be unapologetically an active parent, no matter what societal judgments there will be of your priorities of prioritizing your kids above somebody's conference, somebody's event, somebody's panel. And I will never, ever make a choice that makes my children feel like they were second, because they're my responsibility in the world. And I say this now being divorced and making that choice because I thought that they would thrive better in environments that would just function better. And for all that's happened, my kids are thriving because they have the examples of parents who find fun in life and take responsibility in life. And I learned to own that because I became a parent. I did not have that purpose or that clarity before.
I say my kids have been my greatest coaches, man. They've definitely taught me more about myself and who I not only am, but desire to continue to become than anyone else. I think it's a really beautiful, again, synopsis of how you view the world, how you view people, and how you extend that into this next generation. You referenced the project that you're working on around Alzheimer's. And I think I had shared with you that my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, has had Alzheimer's and has declined to a point where she really is, we have her in minutes and moments at this point. And that's, it's been a long journey. What's your story in connection to Alzheimer's, and why is it important for you to tell the story of a composer that has a reveal at the end?
I took care of a man. I babysat him when I was 8. It was easy to babysit him because he sat there catatonic in a chair while his wife went around and did dishes, mowed the lawn, went out to dinner with a friend, went to the bank to get cash. And I watched him for a significant amount of my childhood, completely mentally gone. The reasons we have cures for certain diseases are because of him. His metal sculptures were famous around the world, and I met him as an addled child in an adult body. And I became really passionate about this idea that's become very prevalent now with Alzheimer's research, that identifying and preventing the deterioration in that first 5 to 10 years is monumentally important. Scientists just say they discovered that they think the root of Parkinson's is in the gut. I'm pretty sure Alzheimer's isn't far off. And I wrote first a concert work and then a book. No one will ever read the book. And then I wrote a movie, a commercial movie, because I used to run a film company for some incredible friends. And I wanted to dramatize this idea that if this flawed man lives a life of loss, of regret, of unrequited love, what would happen when you see the beginning of his career and then you see him at the end, in the height of it, to then realize only at the end all those things you paid attention to around the family dynamics and the love and the loss and anything were inconsequential to all the signs we missed, which were the signs of early onset Alzheimer's. So it's called All Our Yesterdays. As in the Shakespeare, all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. And it's a commercial film. I'm going to get to the next phase of development, find actors, find producers, find people who unfortunately have dealt with this in their families, and tell a story that isn't a documentary about the plague that is coming for so many of us, personally and with our family and our friends. But to tell a story, a beautiful love story about a young man who grows up never knowing who his uncle was, except for the fame, but never knowing the man. And in discovering that man, he starts to put together all the pieces of the shame of his mother and his father, that composer's brother, and all the signs they missed because they saw this as a magnification of his personality, not the deterioration and the disease that afflicted his mind. So like, I want people to feel it. I want people to hear it. I want people to look at this and to go, there's nothing I can do except for be more focused on being present with the ones we love today, learning how to be present with them in every moment when this disease affects them, but to not live in the regret of what we could have done to help delay, if not cure. And I have seen so many people who have told me their stories, and it is so, it's astounding how many people feel a sudden sense of loss when the person who defined them no longer knows who they are.
Yep.
And to have that happen for millions of people and to turn a blind eye to the amount of attention we need on it, I believe needs, and there's some incredible moves about this. I just hope mine sees the light of day, because it's me as that little kid musician seeing everything great I did lost. Even though I don't have the gene or the propensity in my family for this, I saw myself in that man, Jim. And I wanted to tell a story that lets everyone see themselves in those shoes. So this is not something we talk about only in isolation, or you and I in this talk together, where we probably don't mention this to everyone around us who's also suffering.
Yeah. My grandmother was one of my greatest supporters. She was one of my closest and endeared relationships, and somebody that I always was able to call on. And she also was one of the smartest, wittiest, most gritty and caring people I'd ever met. And to watch the decline was a challenge, not just from my relationship with her, but to see my mother become a caretaker versus her daughter.
Yeah.
And the dynamics and challenge that all of that exists with. And so I feel all the emotion in your experience and what you're trying to convey. And I just want to say thank you. Because just like so many other things that you do in this world, you're giving other people access to conversations that need to be normalized. You're giving people permission to feel and say things that they wouldn't have otherwise without your experience and lens. And I just am so grateful, because you may not be able to receive this as purely as I intend it, but you are brilliant, my friend. You are intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually brilliant. And the way that you operate and move through the world is not just an example for your kids, but for so many of us. And I'm grateful to call you a friend and know that you are in my life, even if it's not on a daily basis. You are someone that I highly respect, and I genuinely want to be able to support however I can. And so that's where I'd like to shift next. Is you advocate so well for so many. You provide opportunity, you provide resources, you provide access, you make introductions. You have changed and impacted so many lives. What do you need most?
You know, that little kid in me lives in fear of it all falling apart. I worry about financial stress, and you're right. I have so many friends that if my life was actually falling, they'd pick me back up. They wouldn't even hesitate. I'm fine. I'm actually happy asking for what I need. I've found a beautiful new relationship. My kids love me. I talk to my parents every single day. They just survived Hurricane Milton and got out. So I have a lot to be grateful for. But you tell me what I need? You know that thing that happens in relationships and work and everything, where like once you have to ask for something, you don't really want it as much as people seeing it and giving it to you? I've asked, I've put it out there. What I could do with the backing behind me, the movement behind me, to make this world better, I have the plan for. My strategic plan has enhanced itself. It hasn't deviated. The rule system I set up that's 9 years old is the same rule system. The way that I've described this world, the way I live, the way we've connected in others, it's not accidental, it's purposeful, and it happens hundreds and hundreds of times a year. So I built the system, right? You want to talk about what I need? I want to keep asking, trickling in for money for my startup, for friends to help me promote my book, for taking a business that has worked now for 4 years and demonstrated value in something that's incredibly hard to do, where the only success people see is the monetary, and they don't see the value, the long-term value. And I would say I'd love to not have to ask every single day to be seen for what I do, to get the actual help. And this goes back to the view, the way I looked at this when you were talking earlier about helping people and aligning their passions. My joke for it is, it's like Highlander, right? There can be only one. I'm not the one. I will never be the one. There's somebody else who's that. They have a different personality. They have the heft. I don't know what it is. I'm like the gateway drug for it. But I believe that what I'm doing will launch a connector economy. I believe that the way I'm writing about this will take all the people that are described by Grant as takers, label them, and create a code of ethics that doesn't allow that behavior to exist. The fact that a womanizing asshole rapist can get a new job, the fact that a guy can get a job because they look like you or me, the fact that somebody, whatever race, religion, or creed, who's built and failed 10 businesses can become elected, whatever it might be, I think that there should be a code out there for how you behave around relationships. No one is perfect. But what I want is not to have to keep pounding the pavement for the next 5 years until I'm 50 for people to go, oh, you know, I could invest in this. I could promote this. You have a book. I'll get every friend I know in every city to hold a book launch party for you. That tech you're building, it seems like you've spent 6.5 years mapping it out on a whiteboard until you were ready to raise. I could put $5 million into this. What are we going to do to help people from it? And if I can get to that point where I don't have to answer that question to you as saying that I still need something to help other people with their needs, then I'll be in a point where I feel truly powerful, because I'll have demonstrated that I've spent a huge amount of time diligently working this through, listening to figure out that my hero's journey isn't my hero, that my journey is as that catalyst, that kid who walked up to a piano, played some stuff to get the bully away from that girl, and then that girl sat back down and played the most beautiful thing anyone ever had heard, because she was better than me. She just had to get up away from her nervousness, and I had to get the guy, the white guy, to be clear, in this case, out of the way. And I don't think that changes. My archetype in life, I was always that number two. I'm just taking that lead role to be the number two to those that will no longer see what they do with relationship power as meek. To those that will take that as a skill that should be taught and measured and valued and be invested in, led for it. And if I can be the catalyst for that, that gives my family the comfort of knowing I seeded that, and I won't need to be that Shakespearean scholar showman who wowed everyone talking about Iago and Desdemona and everyone else. I can be that person who said at the end of it, you know, I'm so happy with your mission. I'm so happy with what flipping lid is, Brian. I am so happy with the way that you have owned this. And I'm grateful for the fact it's taken you 30 years to get there, because that was 30 years well spent on a journey to own that, to be a better father, a better leader in your family, but a better servant to people's visions, because you only want to challenge people to get to that core, because you realize your authenticity couldn't exist without being met by that, which is why I call you a great friend, despite the fact I think I told you years ago I'm 5'2", and you probably still believe it. I'm actually 5'8" and a half, because I don't believe that this is that hard to achieve.
Yeah, I agree.
And that is what I wake up positive to every single day, even when my feet hurt. I'm worried about my bank account. I'm worried about my 7-year-old's addiction to iPad and gaming because I keep having to say to him, Max, do you own the iPad or does the iPad own you? And all those things that are the real things in life, to be humble and human, you can't lose sight of that.
Yeah.
Final thing I'll say, I finished 2 incredible fireside chat and a panel at a massive family office conference just yesterday. And I got off the stage and everyone came up to talk to me. And I just looked at them and I said, you know what? You know that extra glass of water you have sometimes when you're nervous before you talk? I had 2 of them and I really have to pee. Can you just let me through? And I promise I'll wash my hands and I'll come right back. And they all laughed because I wasn't this great, eloquent person on a stage. I was a guy who sat in a specific way in a chair now because they realized I should not have drunk 2 glasses of water before going on stage for an hour because that's equally valid in who I am as all this other stuff that might have reached or touched people. So I'm just grateful for you for your questions. You did an excellent job with them.
Well, thank you, my friend. I fully receive that. I do want to say that though you may not be the one, I'm not convinced that there is one that is the one, but you are one of a kind. And you are one to be respected, and you are one to be loved, and you are one to be followed, and you are one to set an example that gives permission to others. You live your life that way. You are one of a kind. And so owning that one of a kind nature of who you are is why this is going to work. And I'm grateful to call you a friend as well. And so as we bring this interview to a wrap, I want to give you one more chance to just give a closing thought. You landed and dropped the mic on the last question, which was incredible. And I received all of it. But if you were to be concise and direct, what do you want the audience to hear?
I want people to understand that relationships happen at the speed of trust.
Boom. My friend, thank you. Thank you for who you are. And thank you for who you are to me. Thank you for who you are to the world. I'm grateful.
Same. Thank you, Brian.
And for those of you that just watched, Mr. Homan jump in and flip his lid. He told us about the stories, the places he felt disconnected, the passion to fight injustice, but that truly vulnerability is what breeds and fosters trust. When we can be real with ourselves and real with each other, where we felt disconnected in so many areas of our life, we can actually find and facilitate deep connection. But it always comes down to the relationship you have with yourself and the relationships that you foster and create in the spaces that you make emotionally safe. You have the ability to get there as well, but it is going to require humility. It is going to require the removal of ego and armor. And the only way to get there is to flip open your lid and scan your can.
What you can probably tell by now is that I love telling these stories, but what I love even more is the impact that's coming from them. You see, we're on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible. But to do that, we need you. See, we believe that moved people move people. And so all I'm asking is if you've resonated, connected with any of the messaging, please consider commenting, sharing, leave a rating and review. Thank you so much for tuning into Flipping the Lid. And if you want more information on the show, how to become a guest, how to recommend a guest, or any of the other details, head over to flippingthelid.com. We'll see you there.